Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What is the scariest thing that you have witnessed with your own eyes? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Was home alone as a teenager during an aggravated burglary, heard something slamming into the front door, went to go open it, and realized I had locked the wire screen door, so it seemed odd they were knocking so hard directly onto the wooden door. Instead, I looked out the window, and to the side I saw a heavy man that I did not recognize. I yelled out, "What did he want?" No answer. Yelled a few more times, he stopped, then started shoulder ramming the door. I panicked and went to grab the phone and a kitchen knife, but halfway to the kitchen, I heard a huge crash at the back end of the house. Meanwhile, the ramming was still happening at the front door. Heard someone scurrying through the back of the house, swearing and panicking. I didn't want to get caught in the middle of the house by two people, so decided to burst out through the front door and bowl over whoever was out there, knowing it was just one person, because I had seen him through the window. So that's what I did. Exploded out the front door, knocked the guy over, and ran out into the street and to a neighbor's and called the police. They were gone by the time the police arrived. Incidentally, they came back twice the next week, and again when I wasn't home, the neighbors told me. Ended up catching them, but definitely left a lasting fear in me. When I was 12, my family and I took a road trip to Florida, and as my mom was driving through Ocala, I saw a store with police tape around the gas pumps and a car with a limp body laying halfway out the open driver's side door and a pool of blood on the ground in front of him. It looked like, and probably was, a murder scene, and nobody else in the car seemed to notice it. I never mentioned it to any of them. I just stayed quiet and tried to forget what I saw. It still haunts me. More recently, I saw a man try to ride his bike through an automatic gate before it shut, and he didn't make it. He slammed into the gate, and one of the spikes impaled him through the neck. This was at one of my job sites, landscaping, HOA condo complex, and my coworker gave him a towel to hold over his gaping neck wound. The man was still conscious and standing. We called 911, and an ambulance took him to the hospital. About a week later, we were back at that location, and the man approached me in good spirits. He was thankful that we helped him out, and I was glad to see he was okay. Apparently, the spike missed a major artery by a hair. Finally, when I was 9, my brother and I were walking around Daytona Beach with a friend, barefoot on the beach side in the bad part of town. Our friend thought it would be a good idea to pick up a stick and poke a homeless man who was sleeping behind a hedgerow in a parking lot. And when the man didn't respond, he continued to poke him. Finally, the man had enough, grabbed a gun from under a sleeping bag and pointed it at us. He told us to get our asses away from his bush, and we ran like hell. In retrospect, it was more sad than scary, and we totally deserved the scare. He just wanted to be left alone, and good on him for having protection. I only learned years later how many homeless people are beaten to death by sick young punks.
I mean, it's Florida, so, what do you expect, right?
So I didn't witness the actual event, but the aftermath of it still haunts me. A while back, I was an environmental technician for a huge industrial waste remediation company. We did a lot of work for the railroad companies. Every now and again, we'd get a biohazard call for what they label as a trespasser strike. Usually it's an animal that has misfortune to be passing by one of the speedliners. In the instance, it was a person. At least that's what I was told. There was nothing left of them except blood, bone fragments, and goop that went for about a mile. Biggest problem was the rail lines were still electrified, so wherever their biomass hit the tracks, it was fried on there. Think egg in a cast iron pan that never gets flipped and sits there for hours. I'll always remember that smell, even through my respirator. Thanksgiving Day 2010. I was 17. My parents woke me up without warning kind of early, and my mom was sobbing. My dad tells me my 21-year-old sister had some sort of mental breakdown at college and that they were going to pick her up. She had been taken in by the state police. They found her wandering in some field off the highway, totally incoherent, but she had managed to call 911. My dad only talked to me for a few minutes before they left and didn't return until much later. I'm not sure what was more messed up, seeing her completely off her rocker and having to talk my only sibling down from escaping my parents' house, or all the stuff that could have happened to her. She was talking about having visions of God speaking to her directly, and was talking about people who weren't real. It was traumatizing as F. I have so much respect for her to go back to finish her BA after something so life-altering. I also lost all respect for her classmates and friends that wouldn't help her and turn their backs on her after her episode. She ended up in the psych ward for almost 2 months and has struggled with her mental health ever since. She just went back into the psych ward yesterday for the first time in a few years, but I've hoped she'll bounce back pretty fast this time. This whole ordeal and the things she's gone through have totally changed my view on mental health and the stigma with it. It has affected me so much that the horror novel I'm outlining is basically going to serve as a metaphor for the narrative of mental health over the past century and how we need to be more respectful and receptive and address the way anyone with mental health issues is treated. My dad smashing a man's leg bones with a tire iron, then other things. Backstory. My dad isn't a big man, 5'6", 140 pounds or so, but my dad grew up tough, then mean as F, joined a local biker gang after the Navy kicked him out. We lived in this tiny house on the east side of Cleveland, rented to us by this effing sleazeball. My parents are young, had me at 16. I was 6 when the landlord broke into our house and was going through my mom's underwear drawer. He had a thing for her and kept trying shit. My dad is working as a mechanic at the time and is on his way home. Dude's sitting there trying to come on to my mom. Dad walks in, sees the score. What commences is a Looney Tunes-esque style chase through the house. My dad wielding a tire iron over his head, silently closing in on this dude. Dude runs out of my room, turns to fight. My dad gets him on the head first, then he blocks with his arm, breaks his wrist. Guy falls down. Dad just keeps going to work on him, smashed his kneecap and the 2 shin bones. Would have killed him if mom didn't scream. Dad got felony assault and 3 years. His friends kept my mom safe from our landlord for that time, even paid our rent once in a while. I thank God my kids don't know that life. Dad's doing good now, out of the gang but still rides. He's mellowed in his 50s. Good grandpa, honestly.
There's defending your family and defending your pride, and then there's abject violence. I think we see the difference in this example.
For me, it was Christmas Day I'll never forget. I was at my girlfriend's parents' place, blissfully sleeping and excited for the first Christmas in a long time, where it finally felt like I was home. My mother died tragically and unexpectedly when I was younger, and I never really felt like I had true family again until this point. Then, at 3 a.m., unprovoked, my girlfriend's older sister comes into her bedroom where my girlfriend and I are sleeping. The sister starts incoherently rambling and stops and pulls the large kitchen knife from behind her back. For the record, her sister is a diagnosed schizophrenic, and she had been having quite a good period before this event occurred. At this point, I am wide awake, nearly paralyzed in fear of what's going to happen next. Except, it's not what I expected. She then takes the knife and turns it on herself and proceeds to carve a giant gash from her ankle to her knee. My girlfriend managed to call 911 while I managed to talk her sister into putting the knife down and coming with me to the bathroom to tend to her now profusely bleeding wound. We managed to get her sister stabilized emotionally before the cops showed up, and I drove my girlfriend's mom to the hospital sometime before 4 a.m., and we spent the better part of the morning at the hospital until she was sedated and supervised. Everyone at the house was shell-shocked, so when we got home, there was still cleanup to do, as there was quite a mess made. Nothing says Merry Christmas like cleaning dried pools of blood on a hardwood floor. That was when I noped out of celebrating holidays. I also watched my mother pass away due to a heart attack, aneurysm, stroke, 5 minutes before she was about to renew her vows. So weddings are also a no-go for me too. When I was around 6, we were going to my grandparents' house. On the interstate, a woman seemed to fall out of a car in front of us. My dad had to swerve to avoid hitting her. That's all I saw with my own eyes. It turned out the woman's husband was trying to murder her and make it look like a suicide. The intention was for my dad to have run her over, but he has time to swerve. The husband had an accomplice behind us, but he couldn't hit her because of how my dad swerved. Some other good Samaritan stopped and gave the woman a ride to the hospital. The guy who gave her a ride and my dad were both called as witnesses at the trial. The husband and the accomplice were both convicted for conspiracy for attempted murder.
I'm very glad that these people got caught, but they couldn't have thought of a different way to stage this type of event.
When I was young, 3 or 4 years old, I remember a friend of the family bringing my cousin back. He was an older cousin who was basically an older brother. I grew up in South America, so things like that happened in my small town. The kicker was that they brought him back from the side of a major road that leads to my grandfather's estate. He was crucified on a very large wooden wheel thing. He had 6 bullet wounds on him, and I just remember so vividly seeing maggots everywhere, huge chunks of flesh just decayed and gone, and a horrible smell that could only be described as pus and rotten meat. My aunt, his mother, my other aunt, who was my foster mother back then, and a large portion of my family surrounding the wheel and crying. The picture of everything still pops in my head, and every single time I had this weird 3D person view of everyone grieving, and me just standing there being too young to really understand what was going on. The next thing I remember is my uncle and older cousin using a hammer to pull the nails out of his joints and a water hose to clean him as best as possible so they could hopefully bury him. When I turned 15 and had moved to the US for roughly 7 years, I went back home to visit my grandmother and got told that his death was a message to my aunt, who, due to our large family, had wealth and ran a loan business. Not very shady, but rather something to help those with less wealth in the town, because she had denied to help a super shady person. Worked security for 10 years, 4 of which was overnight at a convention center. Once around 2 a.m., I was on our cameras with another guy in the office on base. There were 2 others patrolling the building and a supervisor. I saw on our camera a homeless man go up an exterior elevator to our terrace level. Happens all the time, no big deal. I'm watching him, hoping he's just crossing through. He then goes to a blind spot where others typically camp out for the night. I call my patrol guys to go and ask him to leave. They're on their way. I'm kicking back, joking with my coworker, see my patrol units and my supervisor on camera approaching the area, whatever. On the corner of my eye, on another camera directly below the blind spot, I see a body drop, landing straight on their legs, crumpling to the ground. It was the homeless man. He just fell about 50 feet from our terrace to the street level, directly outside our office. I'm yelling, "Oh shit, oh shit." My supervisor calls on the radio to call 911, but the base guy is already on it after seeing my reaction. I grab the first aid kit and run out the door first on scene. He's laying face down, blood dripping from his mouth, hands broken, bones protruding from his ankles, but he's breathing. He manages to roll over and ask what happened. My supervisor comes running down the stairs along with the patrol guy. Supervisor said he saw him sitting on the ledge with the 50-foot drop right below him. Sup tells him, "Get down now." Must have scared him because he just lifts himself up and falls without saying a word. Ambulance shows up, throws him in a stretcher, and the wee-wah him away. Cops come back a few hours later and give us his condition. His interior organs and important shit are all intact, expected to survive, and will most likely never walk again. Crazy coincidence, a week later, I had a new roommate move in. He brought his girlfriend over and we're all chatting. I bring up that I worked security at the convention center. The girl asks if I saw a homeless man fall from our ledge. How the F does she know that? I saw the entire thing. She was definitely not there. Turns out she's the godmother of his children. He's been homeless for several months, in and out of jail, and gets into fights with cops pretty regularly. One summer when I was 13, me and a few cousins made a makeshift camp in a small creek in one of our local parks near a jogging trail. We would hang out there every day for about 2 weeks, till one day we noticed someone messed with our stuff. We all walked around seeing our stuff strung everywhere. We then noticed something about 20 yards away down the creek. As we get closer, we realized there's a guy hanging there with our rope. We all silently left and never spoke about it. As we were all kids, we thought we would get in trouble, as it was our rope. About a week later, a jogger ran by and called the cops. She thought it was a homeless camp. Well, cops find him, and it's all over the local news. Turns out his wife left him, and he so happened to stumble across our camp. To this day, it haunts me, and it creeps me out thinking about it. What really sucks is the JFL program is ran in the park it happened, so for years on my way to play football, I had to walk by that trail and forced to remember that haunting face. I watched a man die on a Cub Scout camping trip. All the adults had to swim 12 laps in this freezing lake in order to be allowed to take their kids swimming on the trip. We all finished and the man was breathing hard, telling my dad and I how he wasn't in the shape he used to be in. Then he just stopped and fell under the picnic table we were sitting at. It was a heart attack, and they didn't have a defibrillator on site, and the poor 19-year-old lifeguard was out of her depth. He came back for a moment, said his son's name, and then the light was gone. The rest of the manly men, dads, decided they needed to see the trip through to prove something to their kids. My dad said, "F that." We got the sad tasks of driving that little boy home. The whole time he was asking if his dad would be coming home after we got him there. We just kept telling him that he should ask his mother, because it didn't feel like our place. I was 9, I think. He was 6 or 7. Worst part for my dad was he only did 6 laps, decided we just wouldn't be swimming because it was too cold, and they gave him the little chip clearing him when he got out anyways, meaning that man pressed for 6 extra laps he didn't have to. F the scouts, all of them. Probably seeing my mom dead on the floor first thing in the morning after severe alcohol poisoning finally got the best of her. I was working until 1 a.m. the night before. I was exhausted and made myself food before I went to bed. My mom was lying in her bed. I said hi to her and asked if she needed anything before I went to my room for the night. She had already been dealing with alcohol abuse for nearly a decade at this point, and it was slowly killing her, leaving her practically bedridden, and doctors had already said she'd die at some point soon. She said she didn't need anything, so I said goodnight, ate my food, and went straight to bed. I woke up the next morning, headed downstairs to greet her. I noticed she wasn't in the bed, but on the floor next to the bed. I rushed to her, but she was already ice cold and stiff. I was hysterically crying and screaming out for her to wake up while calling 911. I think I was in denial for a while until the paramedics showed up, because I was doing CPR on her for almost half an hour while I was on the phone. The whole day has stuck with me so much that it got me an official diagnosis for PTSD and a visit to the psych ward because I was planning to kill myself because of nightmares and pre-existing depression. I was 19 at the time. This was just over 3 years ago. I'm 23 now. Happened a month before my birthday. Also, what made this worse was that I was the only other person in the house since she and my dad separated beforehand. Last Halloween, we, wife, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and infant niece decided to go on a nice, easy hike. My lying sister-in-law's words, up switchbacks. She likes to downplay how difficult hikes are. It's a problem she's keenly aware of. I'm not particularly physically fit, and I noticed after a little bit my vision started to go away. My vision completely disappeared. I couldn't see anything, just a murky black-red. I decided to sit down and rest on a tree stump. I have low blood pressure. I've had vision fade-outs before from standing up too fast, but this lasted a while, a couple minutes at least. My hearing got really fuzzy and faint, sounding very far away, even though they were right next to me. I could hear what was happening if I listened very closely. My heartbeat, very loud in my ears, got slower and slower and slower, and I honestly thought I might either die or was in the process of doing so, and immediately felt guilty that my wife and brother-in-law, sister-in-law were either going to have to leave me there and call 911, nobody had any service, or either guide or, worse, carry my fat ass out of there themselves. After what seemed like hours, but was maybe a minute or two, my vision started to slowly fade back into view and my hearing returned. We continued the hike and got all the way to the top, and then had to bust ass back down because it was getting dark. I slipped multiple times. No major injuries aside from me lightly wrenching my back from falling on my ass onto a rock. I also accidentally stepped in the ice-cold river and got my feet soaked in cold-ass water. But I work in the water purification industry and was like, oh cool, it's basically workday. That vision bleed out to nothingness was absolutely terrifying. My biggest concerns were what my wife would do and how I was going to get back completely blind, or whatever poor bastard was going to have to carry my carcass out of there.